Well, now, I think you all know why we're here this evening. The decision to desegregate the St. Louis public schools has been made.
It was 50 years ago in the landmark Brown versus Board of Education decision that the Supreme Court ruled it was no longer legal to have separate schools for blacks and whites.
White and Negro teachers in St. Louis met in human relations workshops and committees.
This film, A City Decides, was part of the public relations effort to help the city deal with the reality of integrated schools.
St. Louis was a quiet city. We all used the same library and the same parks and the same railroad station and public transportation. But what did we really share in common? These children didn't know each other.
One of those who, if they didn't make history, lived history, was a kid who grew up to become a television reporter. Today he's the communications director at the Missouri Historical Society. Donn Johnson.
I think the first time I was aware that black and white children went to different schools was before I ever set foot inside of one. I used to live here in the 4400 block of Washington, and I remember looking out this second-story window and seeing the top of Field School over on Olive Street and asking my mom, was that the school I was going to go to? No, she said. That's the white school. You're going to go to Cole School. That's the colored school. That was the answer. I never questioned it. That was 1952. I was 4 or 5 years old. I went to kindergarten here at Cole School. It was many blocks from my home. I had to take the streetcar or the bus to get here. I could have walked to Field School from my house. I had played with a number of white kids who were still in the neighborhood, but I had never sat next to them in a classroom. It didn't bother them, and it really didn't bother me. I was too young to understand segregation. That's just the way it was. Then came 1954 and the Brown decision. That changed everything. I still can hear the long phone conversations my mother had with various friends and relatives. What school would your child go to? Will he be sent to a white school? Would there be trouble? All these questions I didn't really understand. I was only 7. When school opened after the Brown decision, I distinctly remember walking to the Eugene-Fields School here with my parents, my brothers, other children and their parents. We were being given instructions. We were being reminded that there would be white children in our school. We were also being told that they were no better than we were. And we were also told to watch what we say, not necessarily to them, but to each other. We weren't to use the N-word, and if one of them called us that name, then we were to tell them we were Negroes, and then slap them silly. Fortunately, I never had to resort to such actions. I only remember one lone white girl showing up on that day. There probably were other children, but I remember this one. Her name was Julia. She had blue eyes and brown curly hair. Her parents spoke with an accent, and they talked with my mother, and it seemed friendly enough. Julia and I got pretty busy running around this playground playing with other kids. She was only in my class for about half a semester. One day, she just didn't show up, and she never came back. I often wonder what happened to Julia, and I wonder if she ever thinks about that day. That was desegregation for me in 1954. Pretty uneventful, really, but forever etched in my mind.
There was great hope for this generation, and it was the young people of the 1950s who would carry out the decade's great experiment in social change, the end of school segregation. The Supreme Court in 1954 ruled that segregation under the doctrine of separate but equal was no longer legal. And while some cities defied the ruling, St. Louis's school district began immediately to comply. It combined its white and black teachers' colleges, Harris and Stowe, into one. The high schools were integrated, and then the grade schools, but they remained mostly black or mostly white, depending on the neighborhood. St. Louis would end up in court over the issue of desegregation in the 1970s, but in the 1950s it was praised for its willingness to follow the law. even though in other ways St. Louis continued to earn its reputation as a segregated city.
Jackie Robinson, the baseball teams coming into the city of St. Louis, those black baseball players couldn't stay in the hotels. They had to stay in homes of individual African Americans. So with that Supreme Court decision of 1954, there were still many, many areas in which we had to demonstrate, had to force persons to open the doors.
Norman Say had been just a teenager when he helped form the local chapter of CORE, the Committee of Racial Equality, right after World War II. They spent many years trying to get local movie theaters, hotels, and restaurants in St. Louis to serve black customers. African Americans were welcome to shop downtown, but there were few places that would let them come in, sit down, and eat lunch. CORE's tactic was the peaceful sit-in. Their efforts received little news coverage and brought only very slow progress.
We would just walk up, go into the cafeteria area, and take a seat. I remember 3 or 4 different places. We went to Sticks, Bear, and Fuller. We stayed at that department store for approximately 18 months trying to get served. We were never served. There was nothing to force the restaurant owner to serve us.
St. Louis's Board of Aldermen finally passed a public accommodations bill outlawing such discrimination in 1961, after most businesses had already complied.